So what I'm going to do today is take you on a bit of a tour. For the women it'll be a tour of what we call the inner man cave. For the men you'll probably find some very familiar territory, but perhaps not in the way that you've used to come to know it. Everybody that I've ever met, both men and women, both can relate to the fact that we've both been hurt by the opposite gender. I'm sure there are women here who feel that in their lives they've been hurt by men, and men here who feel in their lives they've been hurt by women. And so the whole idea of today is to not ignore that, but to allow that to be in our past and then see what we can do with that today in order to move that forward. So what I'm trying to show here is that there are a multiplicity of views around masculinity, and I would bet London to a brick that your views of masculinity are actually flavoured, for the women particularly, by the relationship with your father. And for the men, funnily enough, it's exactly the same. Because we don't see ourselves necessarily. So for men and women, the way that we view our world out there, particularly other men out there, is purely and simply based on the relationship that we have with our father. And we can do a lot to understand our perspectives and how real and truthful they are by understanding what our perspectives are based on that relationship. They say that a girl's first love is her dad. And for boys, I'm convinced that we actually get to a time in our lives, probably between 12 and 14, where we actually make a decision to either become like our dads, or if we think our dads are too rough or too violent or too angry or too remote or too disconnected or too addicted, we'll make a decision to become more like our mum. So the unfortunate choice that we make is we either become like our typically macho dads, or we become more softer, if you like, more like our mothers. And it's got nothing to do with sexual orientation, that's purely and simply to do with the way that our persona develops. So the sword and the heart. And I have mates who took one path, and then as they started to do the self-growth work, decided that their fathers were actually bastards, but they'd become like them, so they didn't have to do all the unlearning. Or they took the other path because they hated their dads, but then became like them anyway, and still couldn't then find a sense of who they were in the world. Okay. So it's really important that we understand what are the factors, what have we been influenced by, what's the underlying or underpinning views that we have around men, what is our perspective, what informed that perspective, and what colours it even today. Fundamentally, Iron John is the primal, passionate aspect of men that we tend to repress and hide. Any man who's been out bush, and Steve Biddulph writes about this in his books, there's that inner yearning to just strip naked and go running through the bush, and be part of nature. And it's really our primal man, our Iron John. The problem with Iron John as a part of ourselves is that if we don't deal with Iron John and we don't make a deal with him, like a serious deal with him, he will emerge as the savage rather than emerge as the primal, passionate man. Okay? And the book actually walks you through ways that you can engage within yourself to actually understand how to tap into that primal passion. Because when we repress our joy or our love or our passion or our anger or our violence, we can't be selective about the emotion that we repress. We either repress all of it or we repress none of it. And in repressing other aspects of our shadow self, we also repress our passion. Okay? What he came up with the idea was that prior to the Industrial Revolution, which is only 250 years ago, only 10 generations ago, as boys we would be born, we would be breastfed, we would be weaned, and then we'd be handed over to our dads, whether our dads were farmers, coopers, thatchers, potters, blacksmiths, whatever they did as a trade. Typically we would either work with our fathers and other men, or we'd be handed over to someone else in an apprenticeship form. And so constantly around us we had, as Stephen Biddulph says, a 6-lane superhighway of masculine knowledge that was fed into us from a very early age. The Industrial Revolution came along 250 years ago, and suddenly fathers were taken away. They were sent to coal mines, and they were taken away to the factories. And that left our mothers with the job of raising boys. And they were ill-equipped to do so. So within one generation, that 6-lane superhighway of thousands of generations of masculine feed was suddenly throttled down to a drip. And we're where we are today because we haven't actually repaired that split, if you like, that rift. So we're still looking today for what that means to be a man in today's world. And so mothers find it very difficult to bring up boys. One of the biggest complaints I hear from women that I do work with is that their partners are emotionally unavailable. And I asked them who raised him. And it was the mother who raised them. Not out of blaming the mother for the event, but out of calling on the mother to say, you need to become more aware of the being that you're raising in a boy's body. Don't cry. How often do you hear that about boys? He's really tough, he didn't cry. Well, why is it tough not to cry? It's endemic in our culture, the way that we particularly raise boys, that we teach them that feeling is a bad thing. Expressing feelings is a bad thing. Talking about feelings is a bad thing. And then we grow up and we meet a woman who then says, well, you're emotionally unavailable. Well, of course I am. That's how I was brought up to be. We're very good learners. In fact, for the men in our lives, these are the sorts of words that we might want our fathers to have been. But what we do know is that there is a massive sense of father hunger out in the world. In my son's school, I see underfathered boys everywhere. And I can pick them because they don't have a sense of boundary. They don't have a sense of social skills and relationship, which they also get from their mums, but dads are pretty clear in setting boundaries for their sons around this is what you do and this is what you don't do. And so if the men in this room decide at some point in your future that there is stuff you want to deal with, you're in for a painful journey. When you start opening up that sardine can with the can opener and you see what's in there, you might not like it. But what I will promise you is that you will learn to live and feel like you've never felt before. And you'll understand the meaning of what it means to actually be alive. But you'll understand too that you carry stuff inside of you that you didn't even know was there. It's your own Mount Everest. And it's the only journey I believe that we have as men that we can all do on our own with support. It's a pioneering journey, and we all have that opportunity to take it. Some choose to, some don't. Manhood, there's a lot of stuff out there that men can do to go and experience these rites of passage ceremonies. It's never too late. And the reason they're painful is it's about finding our edge. As we're growing up and we're going through our teenage years, we leave the sense of the Peter Pan world, the childish boyhood world, and we get a glimpse at some point in time of life. We get a glimpse of responsibility. We step for a moment from completely me-centred, centre of the universe view, and we step out into the larger universe and we suddenly see that the universe actually doesn't care about us. And we start to understand that to become a fully functional man, we have to become more we-thinking rather than me-thinking. And it scares the living daylights out of us. For some teenage boys, that's a conscious thought. For others, it's not. And so we actually grow up through our teenage years and approach our 20s with, if you like, a psychological wound. And the wound is the wound of separation and loss of our childhood innocence, the unconscious perfection of childhood. And we know we're about to step into the conscious imperfection of adulthood and all the responsibilities. And the Indigenous people knew this, maybe not in those words, but they knew that they had to take that psychological wound, that sense of separation, that sense of leaving our mothers. They had to do something with that and make it tangible by making it a physical wound. So the boy can go, I've got stripes on my arm from scarification of the skin, hurt like hell, but I'm a man now. And so we end up with a society where we have a lot of men walking around with the psychology of a boy. And you see that played out in corporations, you see it played out in politics, you see it played out on the world stage, you see it played out in boardrooms, you see it played out in lots of places. So rites of passage are incredibly important for us. And it's important that as men we find ways to understand what it means and what we can do to actually improve our view of who we are. Because once you experience that within yourself, once you heal that psychological wound, you're free. You no longer live in fear. You're not scared of anything from the point of view of that little boy inside of you. You learn to take ownership and responsibility for him rather than letting him out into your daily life and run absolute rampage. And then occasionally you catch him and you stuff him back inside, but you know the damage is done. There's a woman out of Adelaide and her husband who run workshops for men and women. The women's workshop's called The Goddess Within. The men's workshop's called Man's Inner Journey, and I'd recommend both of them for the men and the women because they're absolutely amazing. The Goddess Within workshop has a very amazing ending to it, and I was lucky to be invited to go to the end of the women's workshop. And in that workshop she got the men to come into the room, and there's an exercise that I won't share with you because it's top secret, but it's quite profound. But while we were talking and getting settled, she asked the men in the room, who were all sitting in a circle with the women, how many men in this room have had sex when they didn't want to? And every single hand of the men in that room went up. And the response from the women was the most amazing sudden intake of breath you'll ever hear. They were absolutely gobsmacked, blown away, shocked beyond belief. And so Diane, who runs this, said to the man, okay, is any men here brave enough to stand up and say why? And so each man in that group got up and spoke about why they had been in that situation and why they had chosen to do so. And the fundamental comment, if you like, the summary comment was that for men, it's get it when you can. Even if you don't feel like it, it's get it when you can. And it's really sad. Because it's what we feel we have to do to connect and be loved and all that sort of stuff. And so there's a very, very big disconnect between men and women when it comes to sexuality and relationships, and that's why Pei-Shan's here. Pei-Shan's not about the quantity, it's not about the quality, it's about the connection that men and women have with each other. And shut up and walk away, basically. It's the syndrome that we have, or the capability we have to go when it gets too much, we just push the world away and we retreat inside into this barbed wire man cave. And that's where we stay until it feels safe to come back out again. The advice for women when a man's in that place is all he needs is a good cup of tea and to know that he's loved. The problem for men is that we can go back there so frequently that we end up getting stuck there. And we shut ourselves away, and in doing that, the world unfortunately then loses us and what we're here to give and the gifts that we can bring to the world. And if you're a parent, you do that, then your kids lose you as well. And then that's usually when the substance abuse will kick in, because it's a very painful place to try and live, and so we'll do whatever we can to self-medicate. And alcohol's cheap and easy to get. That's the group. Oh, it's actually about that long, but that's the group in Queensland. So what you can do if you want to become more functional in your relationship is start doing the hard yards. Get into these sorts of things. Go and challenge yourselves. Hang out for 2.5 to 3 days and see what you learn about yourself and other men. It's an extraordinary experience, and I can't recommend it highly enough. And it will liberate you. It'll give you a completely different perspective on life. It will allow you to become far more present, far more compelling partner, because you'll be able to explain and be more articulate. And then you won't rely on your relationship to fulfill you fully. You'll be able to go and do some men's business.